If you want someone to remain ignorant, just make sure they think in groups of identity rather than groups of values. Let's promote understanding, not ignorance. Welcome to the Daily Archetype, a value-sharing community.
I'm speaking with Rebeca Eigen, and she is an astrologer and an author. I recently got her book, The Shadow Dance and Astrological Seventh House, and then I also did her with the Elizabeth Green Method, the Personal Report, and I'm still working through it because I've just been I finished the Personal Report. I'm working through the book, which is really interesting. They're both interesting in that they're like they're workbooks, sort of. They've got notes and they've got like questions you fill in, which is really cool. It's almost like feels almost like a textbook, really, as far as Rebecca's book. And then
it's a journal.
It's a journal, yeah, because you got time, you got the places for the notes, and then you go through the whole journey and the whole process. So I'm working on that now. I just finished the astrological personal, what do you call it?
It's a psychological horoscope analysis report.
Okay. And it's really interesting. One thing that makes it strange for me, I think, and this is just me personally, I'm a little strange, like I said, is that I'm trying to figure out all these and how much they align and all that. But I went through a lot in the last couple of years where it actually, like, definitely caused permanent personality change in me. Similar to, especially now that I'm going through the actual Red Book, it's very similar to like what Carl Jung was going through when he did that, and which is actually a lot of what I'm not writing a Red Book, but that's a lot of what I'm getting at with my Facebook group and everything, is to kind of put out my sort of journey and experience that go through these. But I only say that because so much of this in the personal psychological report seems, I think, very accurate, but going through the change that I went through the last couple of years makes it a little bit different. So that's how I'm strange. Not everybody goes through the kinds of things that I went through recently. One thing I was going to ask is, we talked a little bit about this when we were chatting yesterday, is I believe astrology, and I believe it's something that everyone can benefit from on some level, but it's almost like religion in a way, where people are like, oh no, I can never use that or benefit from that, or, you know, those kind of like prejudices, I guess. So I guess one thing that I've wanted to learn from someone like you is how, like, the average everyday person can become more enlightened from this type of reading. And yours in particular is more specialized in shadow work, which I think is really important. So yeah, if you could just kind of tell me a little bit more about how, like, the average everyday person without a lot of what do you call it, like, draw to astrology anyway, how that they can benefit from it.
Well, astrology came from the same worldview that alchemy did.
Yeah.
Which was why Jung was so interested in it and devoted 3 volumes to alchemy.
Yeah.
During that time, this alchemy was like a spontaneous eruption of the unconscious.
Right.
And the astrological symbols and everything that was involved with alchemy was about transforming yourself.
Right.
right? So you're looking at the hard aspects in the birth chart, and
Hmm.
when you look at your elements, nobody is born perfect. I mean, none
Right.
of us. We all have challenges and we all have positives.
Mm.
And so the way that astrology benefits you is to know more about yourself, because
Mm.
uh, we evolve. You
Right.
know, we're evolved. We're changing. We're constantly changing. But we're not going to get to change what our planetary influence is, because that's what
Mm.
we're born with. We're born as part of the cosmos. At
Mm.
that particular moment in time, it's like the alchemical worldview is what's
Mm.
inside is going to be reflected outside, always.
Right. Yeah,
And you,
from the unconscious.
yes, and so you can actually see the person that is changing and growing into becoming more of who they are through acceptance, through loving yourself, through looking at your shadow, through accepting your dark side. You know,
Yeah.
the alchemists were like very, very special people. So it was
Mm.
the whole process, you know, what Jung now calls the process of individuation,
Right.
that you had to be self honest,
Right.
that you had to have moral integrity, that you had to
Right.
be conscious. And so that's what, to me, your astrology can help you become more conscious of yourself,
Hmm.
and also the areas where you are challenged. Because wherever you have hard aspects in the chart, we're challenged. We're actually
Right.
challenged by ourselves.
Hmm.
So what when we see something outside of us, like for instance, a person like maybe Mars, the planet of anger, assertion, war, you know, physically it can be running, a football stadium, a chili pepper. These are all
Yeah.
correspondences, right? So you're going to see people outside of you that are going to
Hmm.
reflect back to you places in yourself that are unconscious. And
Right.
it's a lifelong process. You know, you're changing and growing rapidly, but I guarantee you at 70 you will still be
Oh
changing
yeah. Right. Yeah.
and growing. Jung said he did it till he left the planet.
Yeah.
So the unconscious is vast. It's vast.
Yeah. It's infinite, and yeah, and so much I think is about. I feel like most people they want to be quick to say, um, yeah, this is definitely me, or this is definitely not me, or that could be anybody. Uh, but that's part of the process, I think, because we're all like this unlimited. We have unlimited potentialities, and so it's good to be conscious of those. Another thing I think is important is uh, maybe it's more of like the religious or dogmatic kind of tradition where we just try to sort of like be perfect and ignore our shadow, you might say. But I feel like um,
Can't.
yeah, the big thing is, well, what happens then is we repress it and we project it on others and the world. So the big thing is that, okay, even if what people need to start doing is going towards doing more of the right things, but as that unconscious repression comes out, whether it's in action or projection on others, we need to learn to be conscious of it, because that's the big thing is when people are unconscious of it, then it it's like it makes the monster bigger, or makes the shadow bigger, or the dragon, or however you want to use the metaphor, and then it just comes out worse and worse. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now in the whole political landscape. And speaking of political landscape, so much of I'm doing like a small video production right now, uh, basically on how uh, Mao and Lenin were really big on this idea of unity of opposites, and there was kind of and even Karl Marx. It's kind of like the foundation of communism. Uh, but the big thing that people need to be conscious of as they get sucked into any political movement, whether it's left, right, center, far right, far left, or anything, is those opposites are always going to be at play, whether that's powerful, oppressed, rich, poor, all these different kind of opposites internally and in the culture. But those opposites need to freely exchange, whether they unite or have their revolutions. And so I think that's another thing that people can use this type of work, shadow work, is to see, there's the levels of the shadow. So there's like the internal shadow, then there's the shadow, the
Collective.
the collective shadow. So I don't know, is there anything, that's probably something you talk about in your book a bit that I haven't really gotten to yet. But
I don't really talk about politics in my book.
Not politics necessarily, but more of the collective shadow.
Not even that. The book is really about relationships. It's about how do you transform, because that's what we have power over, is ourselves.
Right.
So if we're working on ourselves and transforming like our darker aspects into becoming aware of them, being conscious, then we can help heal and evolve everything.
Right.
Because we're actually contributing to that. But like it's very, very, very hard, because people will say, but I'm not like that. But you are. You are. And the only way to see that you actually are, and then you're out of balance with whatever, is that it keeps repeating.
Right.
I mean, it just keeps repeating. It's going to be in your face. And if you get a huge, huge charge, or you cannot stand a political party or a political movement, speaking of politics, that has to be somehow, that both these warring, elements have to come to the middle, to the center.
Yeah, and they will, whether you're conscious of it or not. So that's why I think so much of shadow work, psychology, any kind of religion, astrology, philosophy, it's about confronting the things that we normally deny.
Exactly.
Because like I said a minute ago, it's like the more that we deny those things, especially in ourselves or in our like group identity or whatever, the more that they become bigger and more powerful, and then also the more that we try to force them. So I feel like so much of it too is about those balances. The balancing of opposites happens no matter what. So it's about being conscious of it, and that's why it's good to call it the shadow dance, like you do, because it's really about not fighting against it, being conscious of it, and going with the play of opposites. Yeah, exactly. It's a good metaphor.
Yeah, it's kind of, you can't really do it alone.
Right.
You can't see yourself unless you're in a relationship, unless you're with other people. You do not see yourself. And you really only get to really do the hard work when you're in an intimate relationship, because that's when all of the shit hits the fan. To use that.
You're right.
Because that's when you're, hopefully it'll become fertilizer for the relationship, but it has to come
this shit fertilizer. It's a good metaphor. You're right. And if it doesn't, it will repeat indefinitely.
It will repeat, and it'll get harder.
Right. Whether it's the same relationship or we often get these illusions like, oh, I just need to find the right person. And that might be true to a certain extent, but for the most part, you need to find the right person inside of yourself. And then that way you can better deal with that person.
Share with the other person.
Right. And then you're sharing real people.
Right.
Because otherwise you're just sharing projections of each other's and fantasies
or
and
illusions,
mythologies. Yeah. And I think we talked about it a little bit when we had a chat like a few weeks ago, but it's like that's the really common thing that I went through and most people go through, where we have it all has that cycle where it goes through, that sometimes they'll call it the honeymoon phase or whatever, but any relationship just on its own normally it'll be all fun and games for anywhere from 6 months to about 2 years. And then you figure out that you're real people. And that can be when it turns into hell, or when you can take on the world together. So it just depends how you do it from there.
Well, ideally, you know each other's astrology before you get married. To
Well, right,
me, if each person is conscious of themselves, and then they meet somebody, and then they can actually talk about it. Like, this is about me, and this is about you. Let's read it to each other.
right,
Because you're not going to change the other person. And a lot of people get in relationships or get married, and then they start thinking about how are we going to change you? But you're not going to change anybody. You have to change yourself.
yeah,
And what's interesting is that when you do change yourself, the other person changes, because you change,
right.
because the energy has shifted.
right. You're a different,
You're
whole
different.
different creature, a whole different animal.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, doing
Yeah,
shadow work,
because it's all invisible.
with a partner is really cool. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't been married again, but I had a business partner that
Oh, yeah.
that I did this work with, and she became more like me, and I
Yeah.
became more like her.
Right.
And I needed her, because I couldn't see that part of me.
Right.
Until I could see it in her, I couldn't see it in me. So it was
Right.
it was extremely helpful to understand what we were going through. That we were going through a process,
Right.
that analytical psychology process, which the alchemists knew about this. They knew about that. They were tampering with nature. They were trying to unearth and discover their inner world.
Right.
And they thought of themselves back then as people who were actually evolving God, not the other way around. The church would have them think that they were poor sinners, and that they needed the church in order to for salvation or whatever. But the alchemists knew that they were the ones that were changing in themselves. They were actually contributing to God.
Right.
So it was real different from what, back then, the early Christian mind. And then astrological timing was important in it too. You actually had help from the cosmos when you were working with the planetary transits, and that's a whole deeper conversation. But I want to show you all a book that is absolutely awesome. It's called The Dynamics of the Unconscious.
Oh, cool.
And there's a chapter in here on alchemy, and it's fantastic because she really...
Who's that one by?
Liz Green.
Okay.
Liz Green, who wrote the psychological report that I sent you.
Yeah.
And she wrote this, Jung's Studies in Astrology, which has a lot of his quotes and things that he said about astrology in here. So she's a Jungian analyst.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you about too, is that what do you call it? Sometimes when I have tried to, because I haven't read a lot of the Jungian astrology and alchemy yet. I've read most of the collected works and some other things that I'm getting into of his. But I've had a lot of conversations with people and done a little bit of reading on it. And I know we mentioned it yesterday when we were chatting a little bit, but sometimes what I've heard or maybe read just a little bit is that it gets into sort of the astrological, the alchemical aspects too, where before, and this is even like primitive man too, where we project our unconscious onto the world, whether that's nature, the stars, the mythologies, and then I believe in the process somewhere between the Middle Ages and the modern era that we're now in, it's like we withdrew those projections and now they're all inside of us, kind of like spraying out on the world. Is kind of the predicament we're in, but we don't really know what's going on with it. And sometimes when I've had some of those talks with people online, I think they would kind of recommend books like the ones that you mentioned to kind of like get that straight. But I wanted to kind of get your opinion on Jung's sort of background and how the alchemical and astrological work from past until now.
Well, he wrote the book Ion,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah, I read that
full.
one.
It's full of astrological symbolism where
Yeah,
he's talking about Christ as a symbol of the self.
right.
And he talks about how we were in that era of the Piscean age and that we are moving into the Aquarian age. So we're letting that part of us go, which is that sacrificial,
Right,
that we
right.
have to sacrifice ourselves. Where Aquarius is more about objectivity, it's about brotherhood of man.
Right.
Aquarius is about progressive evolution. It's like progressive ideas. And so we're moving into Aquarius, but kicking and screaming.
Right.
Because we're having to let go of some of that, Piscean worldview that we're sinners, that we're worms of the dust, that
Right.
he died for our sins, so to speak, and that, we are beholden. And that is going away. I mean, my teacher,
Right.
Pittman McGehee, wrote a book called The Invisible Church.
Mm.
And so it's about finding the church inside of you.
Right.
But Jung was very into astrology, so he had astrology throughout every book.
Right.
Just about every book has astrology in it. And one of his daughters became an astrologer.
Oh yeah.
But again, I would take it back to that alchemy and astrology were the same. They were never separate. They were
Right.
they were hiding what they were doing, which was tampering with God's creation. They were tampering by going inside themselves and going into their own unconscious. And so it was very parallel to his work that he calls analytical psychology, and that's why he was so excited when he found it. It's like that dream that he had where he went down into these basements. He kept going down one level and then to another level and another level. You read that in MDR, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where he goes all the way to a cave, So it's like all of this is the archetypes.
Right.
The astrological symbols are only the archetypes. So the same as mythology. It's something that spontaneously erupted from the unconscious.
Right.
So mythology, astrology, numerology, there's a whole lot of different ways of learning about yourself that have to do with the archetypes.
Yeah.
That's what they are. I mean, they're archetypes, and the elements, thinking, sensation, intuition, and feeling are the same as earth, air, fire, and water.
How do those correlate, by the way? Like which is which?
Thinking is air.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Intuition is fire.
Right. The opposite.
Yeah. And then feeling is water. And earth is sensation.
Right.
And so if you're born and I was telling somebody this the other day, if you're born and you only have one planet in earth, on that particular day, at that moment in time, at that longitude and latitude, I only have one planet in earth. So I was extremely impractical. So I would marry people who were excessively practical. Like they were overdoing that. Where I overdid the fire, the enthusiasm, the, risk taking, the, high energy, inviting people over, communicating, I have a lot of air and fire, right?
Yeah.
So,
Very extroverted.
So but I'm very introverted too. So I'm kind of both because I read a lot. And so,
I noticed.
So what happened is that I married that element because I needed to get it. I needed to learn
bring
that.
the balance. Yeah.
To get through the balance. But if you don't learn how to do it yourself, if you're making them do it, you're not going to like them.
Right. Then it's like causing a it's like an overcompensate. It's like an overcompensation on both sides.
Exactly.
Then you're like super relying on one person, and they're super relying on you, where it should be balanced. And
the cool thing is when you don't have that and you marry it, if you get that this is the person you're so attracted to because that is something you need. And then you make the conscious effort to start being that. I bought a house. I have a 4-bedroom house. I work in the garden. I grow vegetables. I'm out there in the dirt. I had to do all of this to ground myself.
Yeah.
Okay?
It does help. Keeping
It
your hands
does.
busy.
And so you actually, when you look at your birth chart, you can see what elements are lacking, what's missing, or you can see what when you see somebody else's. Why am I so attracted to that? It's like a bug to the light.
Right,
You're
right.
attracted to your missing half.
Right.
It's inner.
The other side, yeah.
Yeah.
This is I was reading the Red Book with was this last night? Yeah, last night. And if a person even just gets it for the introduction, it's totally worth it, just because the introduction really makes a lot of things clear. But they made a I don't know how, it's Sonu Shamdiani. I was pronounced his name wrong, but he's the one who wrote the introduction, and he made this point that Jung was very influenced by Nietzsche, and especially Zarathustra. But I think that's very important, because Nietzsche's whole thing was about what do we do that we've killed God, and that wasn't, of course, a victorious thing. It was a lamentable thing, or a horrible thing, that we've sort of destroyed our moral foundation. But then what I think the Red Book really brings out and kind of makes clear that Jung was doing in his collected works and everything else that he was getting at, is that he was trying to sort of resurrect that from the deep, or bring back what we had slain. And so he said, like Nietzsche in Zarathustra, Jung divided material into a series of books comprised of short chapters. But whereas Zarathustra proclaimed the death of God, Liber Novus depicts the rebirth of God in the soul. So I feel like that's really, it ties into what you were saying a few minutes ago, how, and really maybe even this whole like going from a Piscean age to an Aquarius age, where, well, and a little before that, I believe he talked about how the God, the sort of rebirth of God in the soul is a united of opposites God, or a united of opposites spirit, whether you want to call that an ancestral spirit or whatever. So in other words, rather than this God that's like, repress every sin and everything else, whereas, there is a certain element to that, but it's embrace everything that we are and everything that's real. And
that's something that I think astrology can help you do, because it helps you to see. It helps you to see the baser aspects of nature that you were born with, and therefore you can't project them. But it doesn't. But it's about containing. To me, it's about holding. You don't get rid of anything. You get more. You start to include more, and you work on yourself. I work on myself all the time. I mean, everything that happens, I will ask myself, okay, what did that mean? Why is this here today? And so I think that's what Jung was after, was to get people to recognize that we are part of the continuing incarnation of Christ. We are the continuing incarnation, it's and like bringing
the evolving self, which is the another point that was in there, because I'm just really surprised how much is in the introduction to the Red Book. But what was it? He's talking about how the it's like it's something that you go into, or that's in the
psychological report.
Yeah, about our family background and our personal myth, and that so much of what Jung was trying to do, and the way that analytical psychology, his branch of psychology, works, it's about figuring out your personal myth that you're living, whether you know it or not. And that myth is eternal. So it goes back as far as we know in at least human history, maybe whatever history is, and it goes into the future. And so you have this little part in it, And most people are like this discombobulated mess because they're unconscious of their role in their myth. And so one of the points that they made, or in that introduction, was how he got into the hero mythology, which is mostly about overcoming the devouring mother, because the devouring mother is, you know, the herd. It's the collective consciousness, which really it's tricky. I was talking to somebody about this today. The collective consciousness is really unconsciousness, because if you give over to the herd mind or the sheep, you're unconscious. But as you absorb and become more united with the unified self, or the collective unconscious, then you're really conscious of reality. So it's kind of like this weird sort of dual nature. You become, it's like we're born unconscious, but we're trying to become conscious by connection to the unconscious, the collective unconscious.
And we also have to develop self-compassion.
Right.
Self-compassion, self-acceptance, and
self-love,
which is self-awareness.
Right.
The more aware you are, the more compassion you have for others. You don't have compassion for the suffering of other people if all you're aware of is what your segment is.
Or it's fake. That's the other thing where people, I think, get confused, is they have like a fake compassion, or it's like a self-serving compassion. It's like, I'm gonna go help this these homeless people just so I can like take a selfie, or whatever, like, look at me at the soup kitchen or whatever. And it's like, cool, if you're doing that, I guess it's better than not doing it. But if it's only for inflating your ego, then it can be almost worse than not doing it. Whereas
you can actually see that in the birth chart. You can actually see somebody who is naturally sympathetic and compassionate,
right,
because they have a very strong Neptune, and they will be very Piscean. Neptune is the planet that rules Pisces. So you can actually see somebody, like, for instance, my ex-boyfriend had a grand cross with Neptune. Everything squared Neptune. His Sun and Mercury were in the house of Neptune in the 12th house. He had so much Neptune, and he was born extremely wealthy in the richest subdivision in Houston, Texas, where oil and gas people live. Like millionaire houses, just gigantic. That's where he was born. And he was taken to school in a limousine. And yet this is a person who, when I met him, he drove a truck and he had to take a hammer to it to get it started. He was such a giving person that he would give everything away. And I couldn't change that about him. I had to accept that about him. You weren't going to change that. That was the beautiful thing about him. But everybody is different. We're all completely different. And
sometimes some of that falls into the category of self-sabotage or self-destruction. And sometimes that is healthy, and sometimes it's not. It's more about learning to do that purposefully, because sometimes we unconsciously, we don't want to succeed, or we don't want to, think that we deserve to have maybe the
that's the opposite. That's the opposite of overdoing anything. Yeah. So when he was with me for all those years, he learned how to be more to take care of himself better.
Right.
He did. He learned how, he started playing guitar, painting, doing all kinds of singing, doing things that he never did before. And they had to do with his creative self-expression.
Yeah, that's important.
And so, but everybody is so unique that's why, to me, it is so fascinating to look at somebody's birth chart, because we are so unique. And so my role is to guide somebody to see more about themselves, to bring that forward, to bring their divinity forward, because that's your spark. That's the part that you're playing in this cosmos, in the this cosmic dance that we all are part of. Each person has a significant role. And again, pointing the finger at people and deciding, they're this, they're that, blah, 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 that keeps us from evolving that part of us. You know, so I recently, I'm not very fond of what's his name that you all like so much that all the young people really like, Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah.
Because he talks in convoluted,
Oh yeah.
like double talk. And when I'm listening to him, I'm looking at his chart and I can see it. And I'm going,
Yeah.
he's not making any sense, And so that is an element of thinking that is different.
Overthinking, over
analyzing.
Overthinking function.
Yeah, and it's like saying something, but saying it in a convoluted way.
That's something that I've always tried to. It's tricky because it's something where I try to say that I disagree with him, but I want it to be clear because it's a really tricky thing. So really what he's, yeah, I mean, well, no,
I don't disagree with everything he says. It's just his style. But when you look at his birth chart, that's who he is.
Yeah.
He's not going to be somebody different.
Right. Well, and that's important to realize is there's a lot of people, whether they are him or the president, or they're anybody that you may have fondness to or hate or anything in between. And if you learn to, like you said, just say that's how their personality is, then the advantage of that is rather than being like, you can learn a lot from people that, if you would just shut them down because you didn't agree with their personality or the way that they deliver conflicts from you, then you're not learning anything. So that's why all this is really important, the psychology and the understanding people's personalities and even astrology, because then we understand that's how they are, but you can kind of see through that and see where, here's what they're getting at, and you can learn a lot, which is always the important thing. It's kind of like sort of the highest function a lot of times is the sight, like the eye of Horus and everything else. It's that you've always got to be paying attention. And so that's how, if you can see through the BS and whatever else, then you can learn a lot, whoever it's talking, whether it's somebody that you really like and you're enamored with, or you really hate because of personality or their group or whatever. It's important to figure out how to always, like, if you're going to give anybody attention at all, to be able to learn from them. So yeah, all this, whether it's astrology or just personality or psychology, it helps being able to learn from anybody in any situation. But I was going to say too, with him, it's like there's like a cycle of, whether it's a political thing or something in education that he's against, there's this cycle of trying to find the oppressed and the oppressors, people trying to be the heroes and all of that. And he usually identifies the real problem, which is this kind of victim culture, victim mentality, which is kind of this dragon or bad idea that gets in the middle of it. And then people try to be heroes when it's like really people need to be their own hero. And then he'll try to like say, okay, these people are the problem. But really it's just like there's a bad idea in the middle of that, rather than perpetuating the finger pointing circle.
Yeah, I think he goes overboard. It just, when he goes overboard and he's like they, you're like, dude, you're talking about your own shadow, because it's your opposite. Everything is opposites, right? So therefore, whatever he is so against is in his own unconscious.
Right, and he's very forthcoming about that, because in his books, I don't remember if it was both of his books or just in his original book, but he talks about originally he was when he was young in college, he was getting involved in that kind of stuff that he became against in education and in politics and everything else. And then he realized there were all these things kind of like right beneath the surface that he really became against. But what that did is it revealed his shadow, and it's weird because he talks about himself, but not exactly all the time. You know, you got to kind of figure it out yourself what's going on with him.
Well, and again,
he's
and
an
again,
interesting person you can learn a lot from.
we
with
all
the
have
Master hierarchy.
we all have a shadow. So
Right.
you know, everybody has areas where they need to develop.
Right.
You know, that are underdeveloped, and that's part of that. You know, seeing that. What I love about analytical psychology and Jung's work is that it helps you to see just there's certain key ways that you can actually see your own unconscious.
Right.
You know, and so if you can recognize it when you see somebody, when somebody's scapegoating you.
Right.
You know, when somebody's being scapegoated. I had because I'm a graphic designer, I was asked to do a brochure for a children's school. And they gave me a box of 100 photos, and they said, you know, pick whatever photos you want to use and design this brochure. And so I did.
Yeah.
And when I brought the brochure to them, they said, we love it. We love the brochure, but this kid can't be in the brochure because his family and he are so negative, and these people are so negative, and blah, blah, blah. And they made me move the picture over and cut the kid out. And I thought to myself, it's their shadow, you know, they're scapegoating this kid and his entire family. But I couldn't really tell them because they wouldn't get it, you know. So you have to come to this information on your own. And when you're drawn to it and you want to learn about it and you start applying it to your life, it's life-changing. You know, it's life-changing, but it's very gradual. I can honestly tell you that this is very, very gradual. We change very slowly, and we continue to change. And the transits of the planets, we're connected to the cosmos. It's all one unified, like the infinity symbol. It's all one unified
It is.
consciousness.
A point I was making on that the other day is there was I forget the quote exactly from Eckhart Tolle, but you know, basically we're connected with the sun and the planets and everything else. Like
I
you
know.
just said.
I shared that.
Yeah, I saw that. But and then
I like
usually when I you know post something like that, I try to give a short thing of my own insight, because I feel like the only disconnect in anything is unconsciousness. So, and sometimes,
which I think that's Pittman says that's the only sin.
Right. And that's like really what Carl Jung was getting at is, and his famous thing that I post probably a bunch of times is, you know, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we'll call it fate.
Fate, exactly. That's like the first quote in my book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the first quote in
Yeah.
my book. That quote, I actually was at an astrology conference in Washington, D.C. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say that when the individual remains undivided, does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. That is so, that was, when I heard that, I was at an astrology conference and he was talking about the opposites, and he was Liz Green's partner for many years. And he also put another quote up there that I put on the front of my book. And I looked and looked, and this I came to see that what I thought was you and you was really me and me.
Unknown author.
Unknown author, yes. That was just those two were my first introduction to looking into Jung.
Right.
And then meeting Pittman. I mean, it was like gradually I met Pittman 30 years ago. When I started going to his classes in 1990. So what I was getting to was it's a very gradual thing, and it continues to happen. You know, I believe what's happening more and more is that I am learning to develop the self allow myself to take over more often than the ego. Like just moving towards that ego self axis and allowing the self to take over more and more. And I believe that when we do that, we are more, we actually have a lot more compassion.
Yeah, for sure.
It is an amazing change that occurs where you just have more and more and more compassion for people.
Right. Well, and that's an important point, that it goes into the what I was saying a few minutes ago, how we don't want to get sucked into this whole like, who's the hero, who's the oppressor, and who's getting oppressed and all this, because the thing is, we're all victims and we're all our own heroes. But the more that we like try to find the villain as like some outside entity, the more we make it all worse. Because
to a degree, I mean, if we never had rules or stop signs, or I mean, we do have to have certain structures. So it's about balance. To me, it's about balance.
It's about balance, but I mean, everyone's hero is inside themselves, and so the more we try to like get rescued by some unknown group, or us rescue some group, and then get in this internal finger pointing. Yeah, we got to have structure in society and everything else, but the more we do that, whoever we are, whatever we are, the more that we make the shadow bigger and stronger and more dense, compared to saying, okay, we all have our issues and our problems. But what it really does, this is kind of like the revelation.
Talking about ultimate responsibility.
Well, yeah, and what this is kind of like what maybe was the biggest sort of like I mentioned at the beginning, how I feel like I've even like tested on a couple models to have like big, personality change in the last year, because a lot of what it is too is my big problems before were in the areas of like on the 5-factor personality model was in the area of politeness, was like at 9, but now it's at like 60 something. But the reason is because now I have pity for authority, because authorities often are the victim of their own system that they're on top of, and they don't even realize that they're the victim, but they really are, and they make themselves worse. And so that when we see these things, that's how we have compassion, because first we look at ourselves, we have self-compassion, and then we can see everybody going through their like craziness, especially in times of turmoil and crisis like we have right now in the world. Here's still in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of July right now, and we see everybody's kind of like sucked in by these psychological monsters of internal finger pointing, when they need to point the finger internally, and then that's the only way to really be a hero, is you start with being your own hero.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, we are the ones that we can only change ourselves.
Right.
So I really believe the more you change yourself, the more you accept yourself, the more you look into yourself, the more your outer world changes too, because your energy has changed. So therefore, what's going to be drawn into your field of consciousness, even, as a friend or as a client or as whatever, it is remarkable how that starts changing. Right. I used to project that everybody was cheap. I mean, I projected that for years. That everybody was cheap.
When do you think you made that transition to not project that anymore?
I tell the story in my book.
Okay.
I do. I tell the story of how it happened, and 2 incidents happened back to back, and that's why the light went on. You want me to tell the story? It's funny.
Sure. Let's hear it. I mean, I'll get to the book, but go ahead and
okay.
Straight from you.
Okay, so being a graphic designer, I used to have to take my portfolio. We didn't have the internet.
Yeah.
I'm 67, almost 68. So, I had to take my portfolio and show my artwork at different companies. And I went to a company at Greenway Plaza, which is a high-rise building. And I went into the parking lot and it said $1 for half an hour. So I looked at my watch and I went in the building. I came back out and I handed the girl $1 and she goes, "It's $2. I said, "No, I was here exactly 28 minutes. You were not. You were here 32 minutes. I was not. I was livid about $1. I was livid about $1.
So that's when you realize you're the cheap one.
No, I didn't realize it then. I was furious.
Okay.
She said, "I put the thing in the machine. I pull it out. It says you were here 32 minutes. You owe me $1. I was a prisoner of the parking lot." She wasn't going to raise the arm until I gave her the $1. So I gave it to her. But I was livid. I mean, I was furious. So notice when you have a disproportionate charge about anything, it's pushing a huge button. So I go over to the Aquarian Age bookstore, which is where I studied astrology for 5 years. That was that store was owned by John Gray's mother, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Oh. And Virginia Gray and Lucille were the owners, and I took classes there for 5 years. Well, they had an incredible library, and they had an entire room of just astrology books, and I bought the same book twice because they changed the cover on it. You know how sometimes they change the cover of books and you think, "I don't have that book," and then you buy it again. So I had bought a book twice. So I took it back and I handed it to the girl and I said, "I bought this book twice. Can I exchange it for another book?" And she said, "Sure, go ahead." You know, and back then when this happened, they didn't have computers.
This was like in the 90s or 80s?
It was like late 80s.
Okay.
So I come back, you know, or was it? Because I already knew about shadow work at that time. So it had to have been in the early 90s.
Okay.
So at any rate, I go hand her, you know, I go hand her the book and I said, "It's $2 less." And she said, "Well, we don't usually do this, but I'll give you your $2. And I said, "Plus tax." I said that. I was so embarrassed.
The cheap demon.
I was so embarrassed. I walked out of that store like this. "Did you really say that?" I got it. All those cheap people were me.
Yeah.
I was seeing cheap everywhere, but those things happened back to back. So because they happened back to back, I got it. And it was like, it embarrassed me.
Yeah.
You know? So our shadow will embarrass us. We'll do stuff and we'll go, "Why did I do that? Why did I say that?" So these incidents happen, and when they happen and you get it, now when somebody's being cheap, I don't look at that as cheap. I look at it as they're being frugal. They're being conscious of the way they spend their money. They're taking care of, you know, they're not overdoing. I was running up credit cards, buying books for everybody, giving them out right and left. You know, I was like Miss Generous. Because I was overly identified with how generous I was.
Right.
So the opposite was cheap. It was hilarious, but when I did get it, it stopped being a shadow thing. It stopped.
Do you think that's more common in females?
No.
I don't know. It's just like I've dealt with, maybe it's because always been like entrepreneurial, where it's like I wasn't ever trying to be cheap, but sometimes I would like have to think and ask about, you know, purchases before they're made and check budgets and those kind of things. You know, not always, but you know, keep that in mind. And then seems like a lot of the females that had been around in the past, they're like, "Oh, you're so cheap." I'm like, "No, I just have to keep everything in mind because I'm, you know, running a small business or whatever." But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure guys do that also. It's just that I don't know if it might be any more on one side or the other.
There's probably a very practical side to you. You know, I haven't really looked at I read your Liz Green report, but it was like, what, 2 months ago? 2 months ago.
It was a while ago, yeah.
It's been a couple of months, so I don't remember anymore what's in your chart. But women who, if you have a parade of people who are telling you you're cheap, I would pay attention. You know,
Yeah.
maybe you need to be a little bit more of the opposite, just a
Yeah.
little bit, not an
Yeah.
extreme.
Yeah.
You know, but that's one of the things in my book is if two or three people tell you the same thing and you resent it, it's about you. You just don't know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they're actually doing you a favor.
Oh yeah.
You know, by telling you. I mean, I've had several people tell me you don't listen. You talk too much. You don't listen.
Yeah.
Okay, well, all right. I'm making an effort to listen.
Right. It's a tricky balance. Like my problem before, like a couple years ago, is I don't know if I would say I was shy or introverted, or I just would rather the other person talk more. But now I'm a little bit unbalanced the other way, where and so now I'm trying to learn the balance currently right now. Is like a sort of learning curve that I'm going on. Is well, it really depends on the topic for me, I think.
Mhm.
You know, if it's a topic I know nothing about, but I'm interested in, then I want to know all about what the person says. But if it's a topic I've got things to say, then I might speak too much. But yeah, it's all about finding balance.
Well, that is something I do remember about your chart, that you have
part?
that you have Aries and Libra, which is the relationship axis. Aries is about it being independent, doing my own thing, you know, being assertive, being it's all about me. Okay, that's Aries. Libra is, what do you need? What do you want?
Yeah.
What are you interested in? So you have both sides equally. And coming to the middle of that is, you know, you being more willing to take care of yourself. Aries, that's why you came here to be an Aries. Okay, so the sun sign is the most important thing in the whole chart. That is your light. That's your individuality. That's your creativity. That is where you want to shine, right? So your independence and your capacity to be a little selfish is important. Because you have a very strong group or team building skills. You have a lot of team building skills and being part of a group. So you're bringing both of those into balance. You know, being part of the group and then letting yourself be independent.
That's one thing that what do you call it? I've always had, and the one area that always gets stronger, but try to use it more properly is like a what do you call it? Attraction to be a peacemaker, almost to a fault, in any way that I can, and sometimes even to a fault, conflict avoidance.
Passive
which
aggressive.
It comes across that way a lot of times, which is the really tricky thing for me, is because that's not my goal, but you know, us conflict avoiders always, or not always, but usually or often end up coming out that way, even when that's what we're trying not to do. You know, it happens.
I talk about
passive. Manage it.
I talk about passive aggressive in my book too, because my business partner was passive aggressive and I was the opposite. If I wanted something, I asked for it.
Right.
And she taught me how to be more of a Libra and ask what she needed, what she
more assertiveness.
To do. You know, let's do it together. Let's cooperate. You know, I need your input. In order for us to do something different, we need to both be part of it. And that was so helpful to me because that helped me to do that. I couldn't have done that without her. And I'm a Libra. That's what I came here to be. So I'm the opposite of you. I came here to be a team player, but I was like the lone Indian, because I own my own business since I was 24. You know, I've owned my own business since I was 24 years old because I wouldn't put up with anybody. I tell them to go to hell, you know, and I'd walk out.
That's sort of how I am.
I had one guy, I quit 2 times because he would scream at people. And I'm like, why do you have to scream? I'm not going to stay here if you're going to be screaming.
Yeah.
And I would quit and he'd call me and he'd say, come back. I promise I'm going to change. I'm going to change. Please come back. I really need you. The third time he did it, I was 24 years old. It was my last job. I walked out and I said, don't call me because I'm not coming back. I'm not working for anybody like that.
Right.
And I started freelancing as a graphic artist. I just started freelancing at different ad agencies. And then this is how bad wages have become in our world. I was making $15 an hour when I was 30 years old.
Right.
And I progressively went from 15 an hour to 30 an hour to 40 an hour to 60 an hour. By the time I got to 40, I was making 100 an hour. Nobody in graphic design is making 100 an hour right now.
Right.
As of, the wages have come down so much because of so many reasons, but it is so, to me, it's so unfair. I really would not want to be 20 years old right now in this economy. How anybody.
That's the thing with competition. There's always, it's like a twin dragon almost. There's the good and bad aspect that comes out of a lot of competition.
Well, Carl Jung describes this in the book, The Undiscovered Self. And if you watch the movie A Matter of Heart, they talk about it, how bigger and bigger and bigger corporations are swallowing up independent and smaller companies. They're changing the whole dynamic because there's so much competition between corporations that they are lowering, what they're paying people, and the individual no longer counts. It's the corporation that counts. So it's our profits. It's our, and Carl Jung said, as more and more and more of this happens, we end up in a totalitarian state. His book, The Undiscovered Self, is what's happening right now.
Yeah.
It's a profound book. I'm reading it again.
Oh yeah. I've got that one. Yeah, it's a tricky one because, it's almost like a version of, the devouring mother. It's that the collective becomes too strong, I guess. The collective becomes too collective, whereas, a long time ago, it was more about individuals coming together rather than,
individual,
like corporations are the modern mythologies, corporations are like the modern Greek gods. They really are. These that, fight it out, and they envelop each other, whether they're banks or they're Amazon or whatever else. Although, where I do believe there's, I don't know what I'd call it, some light or some promise or some hope, is the mainstream media is falling apart, mainly because people can do things like this, and then also because the way that the mainstream media had been pretty much always, and still is very collective focused and just wants, this herd mentality.
Well, they're owned by corporations.
Right. So now at least it's like the individual voice is starting to be heard, maybe it's still tricky. It's still tricky sometimes in the corporate marketplace and this and that. But the individual voice, I think, is starting to come out, and I feel like that's too, whether you call that transfer from the Piscean to the Aquarius age, or the unity of opposites kind of mythology that we're living now or starting to live. That's kind of the area where we're going, where the economically there may be these huge corporations, but at least the individual voice, which I think is really the most important thing, is the individual voice being able to be heard, because then that's ultimately that's where people find the soul, is the more they can hear the individual voice instead of the collective voice, which
is synonymous with the self.
Right.
To me, the soul is synonymous with the self. It's our Christ within, or our Buddha nature, or the Atman. The Atman.
Yeah.
Right.
That's one other ish thing that you talked about in your book a little bit that I want to touch on is how we feel the projections in our body, which is something I've been talking about a little bit lately, and it's a common theme, throughout philosophers and psychologists, and maybe not so much religion, but needs to be more maybe in religion. But there has to be this body, mind, spirit connection. And it's something that I posted about the other day. There's a Nietzsche quote, but how our bodies have all the wisdom that we need.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. If we if we listen to our body, that's all we really need to do. Although there's sort of a dual nature to that, in that your body will lead you to, read more books or write more books or all those things too, if you listen to your body.
Well, body is
earth. Yeah, I feel like people are out of touch with that these days, though. Like, I think I got a little bit of pushback when I, posted that in some of the Jungian groups. But people don't know how to listen to their bodies anymore, or listen to their feelings, and it is sort of an acquired skill. But the way you put it was that, our projections are felt in our body, which I think is a good way to put it. In that,
well, think about it. The hair raises on your arms.
Right.
You're repulsed.
Right.
You feel a repulsion when you.
Right. You get a disgust feeling.
A disgusting feeling when you're encountered. Right. Like people say, I don't hate Trump. I just think he's a psychopath.
Right.
I posted, Liz Green did another book called The Dark of the Soul, and she lists the 10 things of a psychopath, and he fits every part of that.
Yeah.
So psychopathic and narcissistic natures, that's a sickness of the soul.
Right.
There's actually a book called what is it called? Something soul. I don't remember.
Unhealed. I'm not sure.
I have. Let me grab it. It's right here. This is about psychopathology. It's called the Emptied Soul, on the nature.
Oh, the emptied soul.
On the nature of the psychopath.
Oh yeah.
It's a Guggenbull Craig is who wrote it, and it's an excellent book. And he was a Jungian. He's a Jungian as well. Right. How I have merged Jung. Somebody told me I've been pronouncing it wrong forever, so I'm trying to say it right. It's Jung, not Young.
Okay.
How I put them together is that what I found was that learning about our shadow could help improve our relationships so much, that there's so many divorces and so many relationships split up prematurely because they don't understand this information. And that's why I wrote my book. It's like, if you can take back your shadow and help your partner see their divinity and help you see your inner divinity and be who you came here to be, not what they want you to be, not who they projected onto you, not their fantasy, but the real you. And the other person gets to be themselves too. If two people can see that and then help each other grow.
Right.
If you're going through transformative experiences through with integrity, and the other person gets to witness that, it's very healing. It's very healing for both people. And that's why I wrote that book, because I knew that if people could do shadow work with their partner, if you can do it with your partner, with your family, with your friends, with your children even, we're contributing to the whole.
Right.
We're actually contributing to the whole cosmos. We're part of this incredible problem.
What's that quote from Jung that you probably know it, but like the greatest social or political work we can do is for the world is to withdraw our own shadow.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, which reminds me of what you're just saying that. Well, and so often I feel like we try to be other people's heroes and all this stuff, and there's an element to that that's good and in the right place, but so much of what we need to do is start with withdrawing our own projections and our own shadows, mainly just to put it under control, because that's I think where a lot of people get confused too, is they're like, okay, I'm never going to be mean again. I'm just going to be this positive, nice person now that I've got my shadow withdrawn.
Well, that has nothing to do with it. That's not shadow. Right. That's not shadow work.
Where I think a lot of people get confused when they're just kind of like getting started in this kind of area.
Yeah,
it's almost the opposite of that. But the important thing I think is it's like you still have to be destructive, even a monster, but purposefully instead of just out of control.
Or maybe it's when it's appropriate.
Right, when it's appropriate.
If you're angry, don't pretend you're not angry. If you are, it's appropriate to be angry certain times.
Right.
If you're going to be, if somebody's being psychologically abusive.
Right.
No.
You got to stand up for yourself.
No, you learn how to stand up for yourself. Are you going to be nice all the time? Yeah. Nobody can be nice all the time.
And I feel like most people, they feel like they're either they need to be nice to themselves all the time, where it's like you got to learn how to. It's almost like a inner carving, like you're trying to chip away the crap, and make a sculpture. Really, you've got to be internally destructive, purposefully, not just because that's how, whether you call it self-destruction or self-sabotage, that's where we get out of balance, where we try to be like, I'm nice, I'm good, I'm perfect, I'm smart, whatever. And then if we get out of balance doing that, then we self-sabotage or self-destruct. Whereas
then we start doing the opposite. It'll all go into the unconscious.
Right. So
you have to
we have to learn to actually be self-destructive, or but purposefully and as appropriate, like you said. So just churn that sort of monster shadow, or release it inside as appropriate, rather than just at random because you think you can just control it or whatever.
My teacher, Pittman McGehee, he was an Episcopalian priest for years, and then he became a Jungian analyst full-time and teacher. And I designed his website, and he did a talk called Teeter Totter 1. And today I listened to Teeter Totter 2, and I'm about to post it to his blog. His podcast that I created for him. He's 77 years old. He's retired in Austin, with grandchildren and stuff, but he's a brilliant analyst. And these talks that I have that I've been putting on the podcast, the Jung Center gave me like 100 of his CDs. These are like from 88, 89, 87, 90, and they're full of how he lived. He was living what he was experiencing, and his teacher was Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was his analyst. You know who he is, right?
Yeah.
He wrote He, She, We, Understanding the Psychology of Romantic Love. There's like, I don't know how many books, like 15 or something that he's written and have been translated into many languages. And his book called Owning Your Own Shadow is a really good book. But anyway, Pittman did this talk called Teeter Totter 2. I highly recommend everybody go hear this, because it's exactly what we're talking about. It's exactly what we're talking about. And he did this in 1988.
Wow.
And it's about the fulcrum. The middle is where you want to be. And so it's so cool. Wait till you hear it. I wish I wish that my Sunday, I tried to do a Sunday church at home kind of thing on Zoom, but I didn't know how to use Zoom when I started. So I kind of blew it because
Yeah.
I don't know, 20 people came and I could not get the sound. I could not get the sound right because I didn't know what I was doing. I thought, oh, I'll just play it in my living room on my laptop. Wrong. That did not happen. Nobody could hear it. Only me.
Right.
And then the second time, a few people came, and then then less people would come because I wasn't. I was letting people take over the conversation, and I hadn't facilitated that many people like in a Zoom meeting before, and it was a little. So instead of doing that, the church at home thing, I just created his podcast. That way, anybody can go hear him anytime they want. Anytime they want.
Yeah.
And it's PittmanMcGeehee.com.
Okay. Yeah, I checked that out before. And I wonder how many new podcasts are going to come out of this pandemic, because I feel like there's so many things like this that kind of like that. Like, I don't know. I kept putting off doing these kind of talks for 6 months or a year. And then it's like, okay, I've got this extra time on my hands. And like, that's why I'm trying to, like, I'm in production and like, I've got like more green screen stuff today and, all this stuff. So that, what do you call it? It'll be like a legitimate thing while I've got this time. But I feel like there's a lot of podcasts that are coming to fruition right now. So it's kind of like there's good and bad that come out of things like this pandemic, and so a lot of it is to make people, and I think that's why there's the we're seeing a lot of shadow right now in the world because people having to isolate, makes them turn inward, and they don't like that, but that takes a little time to learn from it, but people will eventually learn from, having to deal with their shadow, even if they don't want to. Eventually they'll see, whether it was someone on the individual level or the collective level, we're all having to deal with it. And I was gonna tell somebody I was talking to the other day how like sometimes it's like, am I a bad person for like almost enjoying the pandemic, like not just like for the pandemic's sake, but it seems so educational to me. All these things that you see in human nature, that it's weird because it's almost like living through a war, but it's not that. Like if it's living through a war, you can really see, there's real physical conflicts going on, but now it's like mostly psychological battles that we're dealing with. So living through this is really, really, it's enlightening, especially to the dark side of people. But I don't know. I mean, it's probably for you, you can look at it and just be like, yep, because you've been dealing with shadow stuff for so long.
Well, I'm also, for the longest time, was a graphic designer full time. I mean, that was even though I wrote the book in 2009 and I went on a book tour, I went to California and spoke in San Diego and New York City and Florida and several other places. I couldn't do that full time. I have a 4-bedroom house. So just, but it was my passion. Writing this book and working with people's relationships is a passion for me, because I've seen the changes. I've seen how they can transform each other and come to the middle with each other. And to me, it's really, in my old age, I would rather do that. I'd rather do that than do graphic design. So I committed to doing astrology full time, but I also knew the timing. The alchemists would say this. The timing was right because the planet Uranus, which rules astrology, it's also Aquarius, is Uranian, is on my career house exactly, and it's like sitting there, and so it means change. You're about to change everything, and I knew it was coming, so I started to prepare myself emotionally and financially to do this. And I'm so happy. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm
good
so
for you.
happy because I'm
Yeah.
getting to use this information with people, with couples.
Right.
I have people now coming weekly that want to do shadow work with me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they want to go inside. They want to
Right.
know
Right.
about themselves, and that is so cool to me.
Right.
It's that intensity, you know.
Yeah, and it's important too because okay, if you deal with most of what do you call it, psychology, like if you just deal with counseling and psychology, you know, the typical, whether it's marriage, family therapy, or it's you know, personal therapist or whatever. Mostly these days, it's all CBT, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy. Which is fine, but it's so and there's some of that is good, but it's so focused on, you know, the outward,
The
you know,
outward.
right. Whereas
That doesn't even touch the beginning of it.
right.
People don't
So,
change like that.
and although I
We
feel like
change
there's
by making the unconscious conscious.
right, there's a place for both, but it's really unbalanced these days how, you know, people are so focused on and I think it causes more of a repression too, because like, okay, for me, for a long time, I'd go through the normal things that people go through, like you know, relationship loss, problem in my business, you know, all those typical things that people go through, and then the typical thing that most people do is they just try to cover it up with doing something else ASAP, you know, rather than process what was going on inside. So like that's what I'd been doing the last couple of years is rather than, you know, just jump back into some busy career thing or some serious relationship or whatever, process what's going on inside, and then I feel like then the right things start to grow out rather than having to like connect all these dots in the world the way I want it just kind of like even now it's starting to just come together, and it's like a sacrificial process, you know, because yet to be able to do that type of thing, you have to kind of sacrifice the temporary for the long term, which most people hate doing. You know, they want to do something where it's like, oh, okay, if I do this and this, uh, I'll start having a better life. And what that does though is like I said, it causes a repression because then you just cover up what's going on underneath.
Well, you know, I really commend you for your group and for the, you know, the effort that you personally make daily. Your posts are extremely good, and I really have enjoyed. You're my son's age. My son was born in 1982.
Yeah, my year.
And you have really formed a group of people who are coming to learn that are your age, which is y'all are y'all are the future. You know, to me, y'all are the future. So it is so important what you're doing. And I just really, really admire what you're doing. I just want you to know that.
I appreciate that. And I want to say too, that that's one thing that I wasn't exactly like saying, okay, come, you know, this age group or this or that group or the other. But that's one thing that it was tricky with some of, like, even when I would visit my local, I don't know what you call it, Jungian Society or whatever they call it, you know, they have those in like every area.
Yeah.
They're they're like, they're all over the place, and that's great. And I went to those a couple times, but and I appreciate them and everything, but they're all
older.
Yeah, and that's great. But it's hard to make that, you know, connection both ways with, especially because, okay, like you are your age, but your personality is more, you know, closer to my age, how that you know, interact with people. Whereas most people, you know, in that age group, they're like kind of grumpy old people. And you know, I appreciate that, but it's hard to make the connection. And I feel like it's like what's the word? It's like a germ that's trying to flower out, you'd almost say, where it's like people in this age group, 20s, 30s, 40s, you know, they're hungry for something deep and complex, but it's such a tricky thing because they feel like only, you know, certain people can talk about it. And like I remember even like a year ago when I was just trying to talk about some of these things in just the Jungian groups, like I would get shut down, and I had to like learn to, you know, stand up from, and that's actually how my group came about, because I would get like shut down or kicked out of groups just for like speaking my mind or asking questions or whatever. And you know, that's really what I try to encourage people to do. And I know that's a lot of what you're after in your work too, is to, you know, help people find themselves, and in the process help others do
have a better
right
relationship.
Have better relationships and help others do the same things too.
Yeah,
which is it's all about relationships and finding the balance.
Yep. So anyway, this has been fun.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up.
Thank you for asking me, and I look forward to talking again sometime.
Yeah, we'll do this again, and
I'll have you on my group, and
yeah,
my group is called Shadow Dancing and Your Relationships, and my page is called Astrology, Shadow, and Seventh House. And that is all I do with astrology. I don't do predictions and that sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, I do sell reports. I sell transit reports, which tell you where the planets are at the moment and how they're aspecting you, because we are part of this cosmos, and 250 years from now, we know to the minute where the planets will be. I mean, that's how mathematical precise it is. These books, they're called ephemerides. I can look up 100 years from now and see exactly where they will be that day. Right. That's how mathematically precise it is. And we have, because of computers, we can do it on a computer. Yeah. And we have, you know, to know what the transits are is how you're changing with the cosmos. And to know your character is to go into your all different aspects of your psychological types, you know, the different parts of you, the missing functions, the way that you will grow the most, where it's the most challenging is the very end of the report. It'll talk about how your paths towards integration. Right. So that report is really, really comprehensive. I mean, yeah, I could not believe it when I got mine. I mean, if you were to say, oh, well, you could say that about anybody. No. You should read mine compared to yours. It's totally different.
Right.
And, you know, I had to underline it, and I don't know how many colors of pens. So I always give one of these when I do a consultation. That's part of the, you know, the fee. And they're $65. So if you do a consultation with me, you get 15 off of that and get it for less. Yeah. And it's so helpful to know it, to actually have it. Even 5 years from now, you're going to call me and you're going to go, wow, I just saw something else that's in here.
Yeah.
Because it took years, really, literally years of reading it and seeing how amazingly accurate it was. And what, you know, when I read yours, when I first got it, I'm like, he is being and doing what he's meant to do.
Right.
This is what you're meant to do.
Right.
And so that, I just wanted to tell you that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's although it's tricky. That's why I think I posted just the other day how it's like it's tricky how the persona can behave differently online. And I think that goes into how, you know, it feels differently. You know, like if I go and whatever, I get in a big group of people in person, it's going to feel different. And being in a group of physical, you know, 3-dimensional people with their bodies and everything, compared to the internet. And, you know, I was talking to somebody else the other day. I'll probably do a call with her in a week or two. But, you know, she's just into, you know, Myers-Briggs psychological types. And because, you know, meeting through
these groups, she thought I was more extroverted, and I said, well, online maybe, but offline not so much. Which is the strange thing about our world now. It's like a different world compared to, the pre-internet age.
Well, hopefully you're becoming a little of both.
I think balance is ideal.
When I was really, really young, I would say that I was extremely introverted.
Right.
I was a bookworm, Yeah. And as I got older and started karaokeing and going and speaking and live in different places, and really, the way this whole thing started was somebody, the book Meeting the Shadow. There's a thing in there called Meeting the Shadow. There's an article on there about New Age fundamentalism. Yeah. And I sent it to this girl. Yeah, it's like a fundamentalism. And so I sent it to this girl who was running a place called Centerpoint in Houston. It's like a community center where they had metaphysical teaching and meditation and crystals and this and that. And I sent it to her. And because I thought, these people are all Peter Pans. They're like flying away. They're not grounded. Yeah. And so when I showed it to her, I started talking about the shadow, and she said, you sound like you know a lot about this. Why don't you teach a class? That's how it started. Right. And I had like 250 note cards, like totally afraid. And I started to read them, It was scary. It took me about literally I would teach there once a month, and I would literally be so afraid to even do public speaking. So gradually my extroversion came out, but the introversion is still there. So it's like we're both where it's needed, Yeah,
situational.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right.
So.
All right. Well, again, it was great talking to you, and I look forward to doing so more online. And then we'll do another call probably in a couple weeks after I finish your book and everything. But yeah, thanks again for all your support, and it's good talking to you. And do you have anything else you want to add before we check out?
No, adios.
All right. Thanks a lot, and see you around.
Bye-bye.
Bringing complex ideas down to earth based on their value, not group identity. This is the Daily Archetype.